Nutty Putty Cave Incident. A 26-year-old man named John Joes headed into Nutty Putty Cave in the Utah desert near Salt Lake City. He wasn't new to caving. He and his brother Josh had explored caves all over Utah, but this was his first time exploring this cave. This cave had a beginner-friendly reputation because it is well mapped, with easy sections like the maze and the big slide. It also had tougher areas for experienced cavers, like the birth canal, which was an incredibly tight passage. John didn't explore the cave alone. He was joined by a group of 11, which included his family and friends. The cave had been closed before because people got stuck, then reopened under a permit system. Josh got a permit, and on November 24, 2009, they entered the cave together. Most of the group stayed in the easy zones like the maze and the big slide. John and Josh got bored really quickly and went hunting for the harder passages they'd heard about. They knew about the birth canal being one of the tightest passages in the Nutty Putty Cave. They then came up with a plan to venture into the narrowest part of the birth canal until they reached a room at the end that allows them to stand up and turn around to head back. They pushed into narrower rock and reached a section called the corkscrew, named for how difficult it is to get through. It's usually the point where cavers turn back. However, 5 years earlier, there was a caving accident that had happened right at the spot after the corkscrew. A 16-year-old named Brock Clark had gotten stuck right there even though he was small. He was only 5'7" tall, weighed around 140 pounds, but he still had to wait 14 hours to be rescued. John, at 6 foot tall and weighed 200 pounds, knew he couldn't safely turn around to head back at that choke point. In a crawl barely 12 inches high, he flattened his chest and kept inching. With no choice to turn back, he crawled forward until he was at one point head first, angling downward. He saw a room lay ahead where he could finally turn around, just like the birth canal, so he kept inching forward. But what he didn't know was that beyond that passage was an uncharted area. No one had been there. Believing he was still in some branch of the birth canal, he kept crawling forward, trying to reach the room that would allow him to turn around. Then, the floor dropped. He slid farther down, nearly handstanding to hold himself up. He yelled for Josh to stop, and they tried to decide, back out now or go a little farther and hope for space to turn. At that time, John spotted a small opening ahead that looked like it might widen, and they decided to move forward to reach that opening, except it didn't. What they didn't realize was that it was a dead-end pocket at the bottom of the tunnel. Once he then moved and slipped into it, he was now stuck in a upside-down vertical position. The hole was roughly 18 by 10 inches. Any effort to wriggle free only wedged him deeper, leaving him with no choice but to scream for help. Josh came feet first, locked his legs around John's, and pulled several times. It didn't work. Exhausted, Josh backed out to get help. As time passes, gravity kept dragging John down. His chest compressed against rock, allowing him to only take small breaths. About 3 hours later, the first rescuer arrived, a rope on her ankles so she could be hauled back out. She got another rope around John's legs to pull. No luck. They decided to build a pulley system, the same kind that had freed Brock Clark 5 years earlier. However, this process takes a lot of time. Every piece of gear had to be carried through tight, winding tunnels, and only one rescuer could fit at a time, carrying with them small tools only. All night, John was hung upside down. His body starts to fail after spending more than 12 hours upside down. He'd been clear-headed, now he drifted, hallucinating. Oxygen level in the air was also dropping as time goes by. They brought a device so he could talk to his wife. She told him to hold on for dear life, and he promised he'd make it out alive. Around 4 a.m., the pulleys were ready. Rescuer Ryan Schertz braced inside, grabbed John's legs, and pulled them to activate the pulley. John started screaming. His body had been idle for so long, when pulled by the pulley, his legs turned blue. He was still screaming in agony, clearly in tremendous amount of pain. They stopped, let him breathe, tried again. He rose just enough for Ryan to make eye contact and pass him Gatorade through a tube. But his limp legs hit the ceiling and jammed. He still couldn't clear the pocket. They were running out of options and even considered breaking his legs to free him. Then the rope snapped. The system recoiled into Ryan's face, splitting lips and tongue and concussing him. He passed out, and when he regained consciousness, he had to abort the rescue mission and turn back. John immediately slid back into the hole. They rebuilt the rig for another hour and pulled again. This time, John didn't respond. Without him pushing or angling, there was no way to lift him. A medic crawled in to check whether he was still alive. At 11:56 a.m., John Jones was declared dead. The cave was later sealed with concrete, and a plaque was placed in his memory. Neil Moss Cave Incident. It's Sunday, March 22, 1959. 8 cavers head into Peak Cavern above Castleton, Derbyshire. Among them is Oscar Hackett Neil Moss, a 20-year-old philosophy student at Balliol College, Oxford. Several are members of the British Speleological Association, The plan is to reach a side chamber roughly half a mile from the entrance and examine a tight fissure noticed a fortnight earlier. Word is it might drop to unknown passage. They worked down through a labyrinth of passages, roughly 1,000 feet below ground, to the active streamway. On entering, they faced the mucky ducks, a tight, wet squeeze that often brimmed with water after rain. Beyond this lay the boulder passage, easier but still full of irregular blocks to negotiate. About 150 meters in, a 3-meter climb on the north wall of the upper gallery led them to a high, steep, muddy scree with the opening to Pickering Passage on one side. Pickering Passage was a long, narrow crawl, alternating between kneeling and full-length shuffling, ending in an awkward bend and a muddy sump. Above the eye hole, just large enough for a person, was the next challenge. Past a thigh-deep muddy pool, the route ended in one of the cave's best decorated chamber, stalagmite chamber, now known as moss chamber. The group, tired from an hour plus of crawling and wriggling, still takes a slow lap to admire the calcite bosses before gathering at the fissure. The opening is surprisingly roomy at the lip, about a meter by 70 centimeters. Then it narrows and twists away out of sight. No one has been all the way down. Estimates put the depth near 40 feet. The top section is slightly off vertical for around 12 feet. Then a corkscrew narrows the crack, leading onto a sloping bedding plane of perhaps 10 feet, and finally another 18-foot vertical drop toward the bottom. At 3:30 p.m., the group lowered a flexible-sided ladder that is used to access confined spaces and difficult-to-reach locations. Moss began his descent, working carefully down the fissure. He was not on a belay, as the team believed the tight passage would prevent any fall. Soon after starting, he reached an extremely narrow corkscrew squeeze. Despite how tight it was, he worked through it. Throughout, he kept talking to the team above, saying things were going to plan. He continued his descent as he began to feel irregularities with his footing. At first, he believed he could maneuver around them, just as he did at the corkscrew. But as he commits to the next move, it becomes clear. A boulder faces him below, blocking his access to the remaining of the shaft. He couldn't dislodge the boulder and maneuver within the confined space. He made the difficult decision to climb back up. Unfortunately, Moss found himself unable to lift his feet sufficiently to ascend the ladder. He became sandwiched in an elliptical crevice only 18 inches wide and called out to the others for assistance. Despite their efforts to lift Neil a few feet by pulling on the ladder, it jammed between the rock and his body. His calls came up from deep in the shaft as he found himself stuck, unable to move up or down. Problems like this aren't rare in caving, and at first his companions thought it would be simple: lower ropes and haul him out. Very quickly, they saw it wasn't. A light hand line was sent down, but several hauling attempts failed. Each rope either snapped or sheared on the rock edge. This likely caused Neil to panic. As he tried to climb, he wedged even tighter just below the corkscrew. Seeing the urgency, some of the cavers left to get help. Within hours, volunteers, police, and later Royal Air Force police support converge on Peak Cavern. Soon after Neil became stuck, rescuers met another problem. The air in the shaft had turned bad, with his position restricting airflow. Neil became disoriented and less cooperative, at times saying others should go and get a meal. Experienced cavers went down toward him, but were driven back by the foul air. 3 lost consciousness while trying. A fourth, Ron Peters, managed to get a rope around Neil's chest, but pulling on it made his breathing worse and did not move him. More cavers came with ropes, oxygen gear, and stretchers. The descent was still extremely tight, twisting, and slow, and the poor air affected everyone. One by one, rescuers came back up gasping, eyes stinging. The Royal Air Force airlifted oxygen cylinders and other equipment. When oxygen arrived at 12:30 a.m., there was hope it would help, but the air improved only slightly. They kept pumping oxygen through the night and planned to send a small, experienced caver first thing in the morning. Early on day 2, 18-year-old June Bailey arrived and prepared to go down. She even suggested that, if required, they might need to break Neil's collarbones to narrow his shoulders. Even so, the fumes forced her and others to turn back. By early Monday afternoon, about 24 hours after Neil had gone in, labored breathing could still be heard. Compressed air was tried to clear the shaft. Mud covered the walls, ladder, and rope, making it hard to see. Continuous rain threatened to flood the mucky duck section, so the team withdrew for safety. When the rain eased, they returned with an RAF doctor to the top of the shaft where breathing had last been heard. This time, there was none. On Tuesday, March 24, 1959, Neil Moss was declared dead. Dr. Hugh Kidd later noted it was the first time he had certified a death without seeing the patient. Throughout the effort, Neil's father, Eric, waited at the entrance. He asked that his son's body be left in place rather than risk more lives. The lower part of the shaft was closed with loose rocks from the chamber floor, not with concrete. The decorated chamber became Neil's final resting place. Today, Stalagmite Chamber is known as Moss Chamber in his memory. If you enjoy this video, subscribe for more videos, and feel free to comment to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments section.